Now, as you know, every night we start with cost of living because it's what people are experiencing. It is the biggest issue holding people back right now. There's a story about it each and every day. You know, all day, every day, there's a headline you know because you're living it. The survey that we talked about earlier in the show was shocking today from ACOS. Shocking because it didn't have an effect of leading the news. It didn't have the effect of getting the government to talk about this at all today. Instead, we're heaving under $1 trillion of Liberal Party debt. That would have been bigger if the former government had made boneheaded decisions like what the Labor Party wanted, which was to spend $1.50 for every dollar that they were spending and to buy Virgin Airlines. Good airline as it is, but still. Jane Hume is part of the Shadow Ministry, part of the Shadow Cabinet, and joins us now because she's been inspired by much that we've been talking about here, and also reports that people are calling into suicide prevention hotlines because of what's happening. Senator, you remember this from government and how hard it was to get your arms around, but I tell you what, you are more invested in opposition than this government actually is, because they talked a great game, they fooled plenty of people at the ballot box, but they have delivered zero. In fact, 4 interest rate rises on their watch.
When you think about all of those press conferences and interviews that Anthony Albanese did prior to the election, saying that everybody would be better off under an Albanese government, well, I reckon you'd be pretty hard-pressed to find an Australian right now, Paul, that's better off today than they were just a few months ago, whether it be at the grocery checkout, whether it be when they're paying their mortgage, whether they're paying their energy bill. And the most frustrating thing about this, the fact that the cost of living is skyrocketing, is that Labor has no economic plan to tackle it. Now, of course, if you haven't got a plan, you know how the saying goes, you plan to fail. And you know, I know it's really easy to be critical of this, but we actually really want to be constructive. We want the government to succeed here. We want them to have an economic plan to tackle inflation. We want them to have an economic plan that will help them tackle energy prices. We want them to have an economic plan that will tackle the cost of living, because the cost of failure is just far too great for Australia.
Well, and this is it. You're Shadow Minister for Finance. You had similar responsibilities again in government, so you know how this works. They have this mini-budget coming up in a few weeks' time where they set an expectation that something would happen. Now, OK, they might turn around and pull sort of a Kevin Rudd and here's $900 for everyone, but there's some serious structural things that if they get them wrong, they make the problems worse. If they continue to supercharge debt, deficit, then things get worse with inflation, cost of goods, interest rates. It gets worse and worse and worse, while at the same time they're cheering on every single union demand for increased pay, regardless of whether the employer can actually pay for it. They have levers they can pull, yet it feels like the Treasurer is a passenger, constantly saying, oh, look, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Sorry, no, mate, we've called Triple O, you're the firefighter, put it out.
Well, this is the thing. Budgets are all about priorities, and Labor's priorities are all over the shop. I mean, the fact is that at the moment, because Labor has this great big spending agenda, then the RBA is the one that has to do all the heavy lifting to try and get interest, to try and get inflation down. That's the RBA's job. The RBA's job is to try and keep inflation under control. But the problem is, if your monetary policy is going one way and your fiscal policy is going the other, well, then your monetary policy has to do all the heavy lifting. So poor old Philip Lowe, he's out there on his own because the Treasurer has completely deserted him. And now he has to do all the heavy lifting, keep raising interest rates, which of course makes things much worse for mortgage holders. So it's about time that the Treasurer comes to the party and presents some really credible policies on how to decrease spending, how to decrease its fiscal agenda, but at the same time tackle those cost of living issues. And look, if they came to the opposition with credible policies that would manage the budget sensibly, but at the same time not add inflationary fuel to the fire, well, we will be open to that. We want to be constructive here.
Yeah, correct. Here's the Treasurer, again, making the point that I think that he's a passenger, not a participant. Have a look at this.
Well, we've just come into office, Pete, and you might, I think most people would agree, that if there was some easy switch that you could flick to make all of these cost of living pressures disappear, then somebody would have flicked it already. Our job is to provide responsible cost of living relief in a way that doesn't put upward pressure on inflation and make the job of the Independent Reserve Bank even harder.
But when they were in opposition, they set an expectation. That's why, in part, I'm so furious and so relentless about it, is they set an expectation. And if I'm the only person in the media that's going to hold them to their expectation, gladly, I'll do it every night. I'll see you at 8 o'clock.
Well, don't forget the promise too that they were going to bring down energy bills by $275.
Correct.
So that seems to have disappeared entirely. In fact, they said it over 90 times during the election campaign. Now, crickets, they won't even actually say the words $275. Look, when we left government, we know that we left the economy in good shape. You know, there was a 3 in front of the unemployment and it was heading down. Growth had really picked up, which was fantastic after 2 really scary years of COVID, and we maintained that AAA credit rating. The budget was in an improving position, and we know that because there's been $50 billion found down the back of the couch, according to Jim Chalmers, down the back of the couch. That was actually because more people are employed. That means that there's higher tax receipts and there's lower welfare payments. So the budget was in an improving position. But all that Labor seems to be promising now is a high taxing and high spending budget, and that would be absolutely disastrous. So we want to make sure that we keep the pressure on the Labor government now to rein in its fiscal ambitions, to try and put aside that giant wish list that's come out from the unions, and to just to concentrate on its responsibility to lower the cost of living for Australians so that all the heavy lifting doesn't have to be done by Philip Lowe and the RBA.
Jane, you are a star. Don't be a stranger. You're always welcome here. Thank you very much, Liberal Senator for Victoria,
Good to be with you
Jane
again, Paul.
Hume.